Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to introduce Jack Parker, who's doing this webcast. Jack's an old-timer. I've known Jack since, I don't know, when did we first meet? Back in 92, 93 at one of the conferences, I think, Jack.
You convinced me to write an article back in 91? I don't know.
That's right, for the WAG newsletter.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, it was way back when. And so I'm really pleased and excited to have Jack do this webcast. And so with that, Jack, why don't you take it away?
All right. See if I can make this thing start. All right. So that's me. That's still me. Lester has some rules here that you need to live by, which is that you keep yourself muted. This will be recorded, and afterwards the slides will be posted on the ADT site. I would prefer not to lecture, but rather have a conversation. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute and ask it. If that doesn't work, we'll stick with the chat window. But it's a lot easier to do that than constantly look at the chat window to see if somebody's asking a question. When I first started putting this talk together, well, I should go back. Many moons ago, when the world was new and everybody thought it was flat, I got together with some other guys and we put together a load FAQ, which talks about all of the loaders for Informix. This, of course, has fallen off the internet. I was thinking of updating it in this talk, but there's not a lot of point to it because very little has changed. So we'll put that load FAQ out on the ADT site, and we'll talk about some of the new things here, which are basically external tables and the high-performance loader. The high-performance loader, I think, should be taken out in the backyard and shot. Now that they're external tables, they are a lot easier to work with. The high-performance loader is finicky and confusing, but it does do EBCDIC. So that's probably the one reason to hang on to it. External tables. These are from the XPS world, which was version 8, and were ported in version 11. You get a lot better control over what you're trying to do, especially in a scripting environment. And we'll show you some examples getting into that. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 basic loaders. The first is the basic load and unload, which is kind of simple. DB load, and I'm saying seriously because DB load is an ancient loader, but it's also bulletproof, and there's quite a bit you can do with it. And then I want to talk about external tables, and I want to touch on the time series loader. Yeah, I know I can't count. The time series loader I don't really count as a real loader. It's more of an environment, but I do want to touch on it. Okay, considerations. 32-bit systems, you're stuck with a 2 gig file limit, so you want to make sure that you're unloading or loading data that conforms to that. You know, if you have 8 gig of data, you might break it into 4 files or 5 files. You want to make sure you have enough space to load or unload. That's always a consideration. Logging, which we'll touch on in a bit. Violations tables we'll also talk about. Light scans and light appends. So when you do a normal read on a table, that data goes into the buffer pool and pushes other data out of the way, and that can make for bad things when you're trying to read a huge, monstrous table. A light scan uses its own buffer pool, so it doesn't push other data out of the way, and it doesn't have the same overhead. So it can be like 3 times faster than normal read. So if you can get light scans to work, that's something you should try. Light appends are kind of the reverse. Data is not written through the buffer pool. It's written directly to a new page, and then at the end of a successful load, that page is attached to the table you're loading. And then partitioning, which we'll also talk about. Okay, logging, which I said we'd talk about. We're going to talk about it now. An insert is a logged operation. So I can show you that if you like, but I assume everybody accepts that. So if you're doing a load against a regular table of a massive amount of data, you could run into a long transaction where you fill up the logical logs with all of these rights, and that would be a bad thing. So that is something to consider. A raw table does not have logging. So you can load into a raw table all day long and not worry about long transactions. Except that extent allocations are still logged. Now, extent allocations you're going to have, if you haven't sized the table properly, you may get a dozen or 2 dozen extent allocations. That's not going to cause a long transaction, but it is still logged. Okay, load and unload. Let's start with unload. A very simple unload to a file, select everything from a table. The data that comes out is pipe delimited, which you can change by setting the environment variable db delimiter. Special characters are escaped with the backslash. So if you have multi-line output, you'll see backslashes at the end of your lines. If you have a backslash, you'll see a backslash in front of it. If there's a pipe character in your data, you'll see a backslash in front of that. Again, that's something you can set by changing the default escape character. So let's have an example. If I can find one. Okay, so that is actually all of the data that we will be working with today. And if we look at the first example, all we're going to do is unload that data. And boom, it's done. We can take a look at it. Where's that data months? What did oh, because I'm an idiot. So as you can see, all it is a month abbreviation and a number. And there's a pipe delimiter between each field and a terminating pipe delimiter. Load doesn't have to have a terminating pipe delimiter when you're loading, but all of the other loaders get upset if they don't see that there. Okay, the second one is that you can unload anything you like. So in this case, it's a stupid join between 2 tables, sys tables and sys columns, but it's showing you that you can do that. Any SQL you can think of that produces data, you can fire to an unload. And if you like, no, it's data. What do they call it? Tab calls. There is the data that got unloaded. You can see a lot of pipes. Okay, big deal. All right. So that was those 2 examples. When you load, it's just the opposite. Load from file, insert into table. It's very effective for small loads, but it's handled as a single transaction. So if you have 10 million rows to load, this is probably not the loader that you want to use. But it's very effective for small loads. The complete syntax is load from file name. You can give it a delimiter here, and you can change the order of the columns that you want to input, where you want to put the data. But you do have to consume all of the columns from your source. So if there were 4 columns, 4 fields in the source, this would fail. And let's have a look at that example. All we're going to do is load a second month's table. And boy, that was complicated, wasn't it? I always do that. And there you see all of my data. Notice that there's also a timestamp, and I didn't specify that in the load file, in the load command. And my load command was just putting in the month and the month number. But if we look at the table, what was that, month 2? You'll see that I have a column there called timestamp, and it has a default of the current time. So that's how that got populated. something, to consider. All right, so that's that example. Okay, Microsoft, when they unload data from their database, like a CSV format. That is where the delimiter is a comma, and they protect the delimiter in their data by quoting strings that have commas in them. And so here's an example. Something like that is data you might expect to see from SQL Server. To convert that to a pipe delimited file that we would like, we can run this little script that I have, which will preserve the commas, change the delimiters to pipes, and you can see still preserve the comma, and it's got an extra line there, which is kind of interesting because I was expecting to read DOS data, not Unix data, and DOS data has a different record separator. So if we comment that out and run again, you'll see that the pipe is now here at the end of it. The actual code for that is fairly simple, and it's in the notes for the slide. Oracle, one of my favorites. They have a standard date format that is standard to Oracle, but nobody else. And that can be interesting to try and read. There is a DB time variable where you can set it to understand that date format and allow you to load it. So the D is the day, the B is the month name, and the Y is the year. You have to also set that environment variable, use date time environment, so that the loader will pay attention to your DB time. That's one way to skin that cat. There is another way. This is an Oracle to Informix date. It takes that Oracle string, looks up the month name, turns it into a number, and gives it back. So you can use that in a SQL statement with insert in a table, select the function, handing its date from your source. Okay, dbload has two parts. One is a command file, which can be pretty complicated if you want, and then the execution that you do from the command line. It commits rows every 1,000 rows, although that is configurable at the command line. Oops, let's go back. So let's have a look at that. So in this case, I am going to load from a 10,000 rows. Very simple. Delimiter is pipe. There are 3 fields, and I'm going to put into a table I'm calling 10K. So, what was that, 004? Yeah. And boom, that's done. Oh, here was the code that we used to run that. Then the second example is a little more complicated. In this one, this is the command file we're looking at. We're going to spell it right. We're going to load 2 tables at the same time from that same initial data. And in the second case, I'm changing the order of the columns that I'm populating. So I can skip a column here. I don't have to consume every field. I can change the order of them. There are other things you can do with dbload as well. And let's just run that one. And as you can see, it's, not that slow. Okay. If your table is partitioned, you can load it in parallel with dbload. So in this case, we're going to kick off 4 loads that run at once into the same table. If we look at one of these guys, it is consuming those same 3 fields again, but this time it's putting it into a partition 1. If we look at, what is the name of this table, 10K3, you can see that it's partitioned by that part number, and I have 4 partitions. Which one is this, 006? Yeah, okay. So if I run 006, it's done. You can see that it's doing these all at the same time. The trick to that is this little flag at the end, the R, which tells it not to lock the table while it's loading. Otherwise, dbload does lock the table. Excuse me. Okay, external tables. Any questions on those so far? Okay. External tables are just like regular tables, except they're different. You create one, you can give it a specific, column list like you would with a normal table, or if you're mirroring an existing table, you can do same as. So table external same as table. And then using your data files, in this case I'm saying use a disk file. You can also use tape or pipe. Format is delimited. If there are rejects, I want you to kick them out to this reject file. And most importantly, at the end there, I want to do them in Express. I have to put in a plug here for Mike Walker. He's going to be giving a longer talk on external tables in a couple of webcasts. So just like a regular table, you can do a select count from it, although you have to be careful because there is no page header. So select count isn't just going to the page header and giving you back the number of rows. It has to read the entire file that your external table points to. It's kind of like Oracle and SQL Server. You can select the first 10 rows from it. You can load from it, which is what we want to do here, or unload to it. But you have to be careful. There are no statistics for an external table. If you go look in systables at the external table, you will see that it has 2 billion rows in it, regardless of how much data is in it. Only because Informix doesn't know, so it gives it max int or max half int, whatever. A join to such a table would be interesting, as in that would be a bad thing. You can do a join to an external table, but it's going to have to read that entire table. So if it's trying to do, and the statistics are bad for it, so who knows what would happen. So our example, I'm going to load 500 megabytes of data. That's this file up here. Okay, it's 498 meg, but that's close enough. And there it is. That's all there is to it. Let's time it. 07. And it helps if you give it a database name. As you can see, this is 500 meg. It's going to take a while to do that. I was talking to some Oracle folks recently, and they were talking about their ability to do a whole 10 gig a day. Oh, that was 11 seconds. Yeah, that's horrible time for 500 meg. Example 8, we're going to do the same load again, but into a partition table. That will make it run faster on enterprise class hardware. On my laptop, it is not. But to give you, to show you, that's what this table is. It's fragmented by round robin. There are 4 partitions. And here we are loading that. And you're going to see that it probably takes about the same amount of time because it's running on my laptop. If this were enterprise class hardware, that would probably take 2 or 3 seconds. Yeah, in fact, it took a second longer. Okay. Loading from external tables. When you're doing this, make sure that your destination is a raw table. We didn't look at that back here. If you look at this table definition here, it is created as a raw table. So make sure your destination is raw. That means there's no replication. So any data you put in is going just to that table. You want to make sure you don't have indexes because that's going to slow things down. You'd get a much cleaner index at the end if you build the index after your load. You want to make sure there are no triggers. We ran into a bug recently where there was a warehouse accelerator trigger to trickle data into the warehouse accelerator as it was loaded. The external table had 12 files as part of the external table. So Informix only loaded the first one. And then the second time it loaded the last one. And then the next time it was loaded the third one. So you got to be careful with triggers. Then you want to do your insert. After the end of that, you alter the table to standard and take a backup, even if it's fake. I may have 5 and 6 backwards. I think you have to take the backup before you alter the table type. And then create your indexes and whatever else, triggers, stored procedures, whatnot. And of course, don't forget to update statistics. Don't do this every day. This is meant to be something that you do occasionally. It's not meant to be, you don't flip tables between standard and raw as a general practice on a regular basis. You know, once a month, sure, but be careful. Okay, something else you can do with external tables is unload to a compressed file. On enterprise class hardware, that would make this run a lot faster. Typically, something like 2 to 4 times faster. So you make a pipe. On my Mac, that would be make FIFO-P file name or pipe name. You create your external table pretty much the same, except that your data file is pipe and the pipe name, which we made right up there. Format Informix. So the Informix format means it's just the raw data page. It's not rows like you would expect. That means you don't have a conversion cost in going to and from the file. And then, of course, Express. Then to start it off, you cat the pipe through gzip into your file where you want it to bind up, and then do your unload. The load is just the opposite. The only difference is the stuff I haven't read. So the zip command is of course, the opposite. The C says don't unzip the file, just unzip the contents. So you're not going to wind up with the decompressed file, just the contents will get thrown into that pipe. And then, of course, the insert is the opposite. I don't like to do this because there are too many moving parts. I have seen one or more of the gzips fail, one of the pipes fail, and you wind up not being sure of if you got all your data. So if you're going to do this, make sure you're checking the row counts both in the table and that got unloaded. And let's have a look at that in real life. I have all these TGIF notes here that, you know, I have TGIF on my shoes. It says toes goes in first. So the 009 is to let me know what I'm doing. So in this case, you can see here I have a shell script that's going to cat the pipes into their different files, and here's my actual SQL. So 09 unload shell. And again, this is on my Mac, so it's not enterprise class hardware. It's not going to be any faster than it was. And then the opposite is we're going to unzip the parts that we zipped and load. And again, this is actually probably going to take longer than the original load, which was what, 11 seconds, 12 seconds, something like that? 15. But that's half a gig of data we just moved around. Okay. Time series. This is really an environment for you to write your own loader. I bought a car recently, and I was sitting in the driveway with a beer and the owner's manual, and reading through the owner's manual and looking at the buttons on the dashboard, trying to figure out what everything did. And the owner's manual didn't quite match the car. I feel the same. That was my experience with time series loader and the Informix documentation as well. Things kind of work sometimes the way they say it does, and other times it doesn't. Something to consider with time series is that you aren't loading a table. You're just loading the time series within the table. If there are multiple time series in the table, you have to load each of them separately. This is what I got to work for me in loading a table, loading a time series. So the TSL init is where you're starting a connection. TS hours is the name of the table. Hours is the name of the time series. The put is where it picks up the data from the file and sucks it in. The flush is where it writes it to disk. If you have a lot of data, you'll see that the put sucks it in a heartbeat, but then the flush takes, a couple minutes. I've seen up to 10 minutes to actually flush the data. And then the session close there at the end terminates the session. The 261 is a flag. It's two different values. The 256 says reduce logging, and the 5 says replace duplicate elements. And if you add them together, okay. No, we wanted to have an example there. So also, in this case, here's this data I'm loading. The primary key is these first two, employee ID and department number. Then there's a timestamp and a number of hours they worked. So you only have to identify that primary key on the first row. All subsequent rows, they're empty until the values change, which will be 2018. Oops, missed it. There. That's a new employee. So here's the actual TSL, which is just like it was there. And if we run that, it just sucked it all up. Now, this is the number of rows that were in the data file, and that's the number of elements it wrote. There's a difference there. And as you can see, I'm not getting any error message here. Supposedly, that's an option that you can change where those error messages are written. Exploring it, that was not my experience. They are written to the Informix log file, right here. So if we tail the ts.dat, I added 2 rows at the end with that are missing base records. So they're invalid and they got kicked out. But they got kicked out to the Informix log file, which is kind of funky. Where are we? There we go. Serviceability, error handling. This varies. With load, you're out of luck. If you have 100 rows and the 49th row is bad, rows 49 through 99 or 100 don't get loaded. You get the first 48. That is sometimes not desirable. With DB load, your bad data gets written to a log file. If you have set up a log file with external tables, it goes to the reject file. And with TSL put, it goes to the Informix log file. This isn't a great use case, but violations table can be very useful. Tables can be very useful for catching errors. If you don't want your load to fail, but you do want to catch bad data, so you could use this with load, for example. You can start a violations table, and all of your bad data will fall into there. So this is an example. What is it, 11? So there we are. We're set up for it. And then that was 10K2. So if it's 4? No. 5. You can see that no data got loaded into that second table. It all got rejected because I had a unique index, and this is the second time I've tried to load this data. And the name of the table is this. And if we look at the violations table, we have 10,000 rows there, and there will be a description of what's wrong with each one in the diagnostic table, which we can look at. So there's the row. The reason it failed was JP2, which was the index. And so this is the why it failed, and this should be the raw data. And indeed, there's raw data. The key that I tried to load, the string, and the timestamp. Those were the 3 columns in the table. Okay. More considerations, which means we're about done. PDQ priority. So this controls how much decision support memory you get allocated to you. But it also controls parallel scans. If you have PDQ priority set to 0, and you're reading a partition table, it will read one fragment at a time. So when you're unloading, if you set your PDQ priority to some value greater than 1, I would say, anywhere from 1 to 100, you will get parallel reads. Light scans, this is a very, it's hard to find information about light scans anywhere. But I believe we talked about it. You want to make sure that you're in dirty read, that you're reading a lot of data, and that you have small buffers so that the data you're reading is larger than the buffers you have, in which case you'll get light scans. You can try setting them with export light scans equal force. I have not found that to be effective. And then be creative. There are all kinds of issues you will run into, like that Oracle date. There's always some way to skin a cat, and it's really especially true with external tables. All right. Anybody have any questions? The chat window is empty.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't see any questions in the chat. If you do have a question and you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead and do it.
Was that useful in any way, shape, or form?
I thought it was, but I'm biased. I asked you to do it.
It is useful. It is. It's Jack. Jack and yeah. It was quick presentation. Very good, actually. Thank you.
Okay. All right. You want to play us out, Art, Lester?
Yeah. So let me talk about the next 2 webcasts. And Jack's presentation is being recorded, and the slides will all be on our website probably tomorrow or by Monday at the latest. So we have 3 more webcasts this year we're going to do. I'm going to do the next one in September on capturing SQL metrics with SQL Trace. Also, I'll take a look at a couple of sysmaster tables that allow you to do that. And so we'll take a couple of options there and see how that goes. And then in November, we're going to skip October because I hope I see all of you at the Informix User Conference here in Washington, D.C. Go to iiug.org and sign up if you haven't already done so. That will be an exciting time, and you'll get to meet all of us there in person. And then in November, Mike Walker will be doing his talk on external tables. And it's a deep dive just on the external tables part of what Jack talked about here. And then the one I'm really excited about is in December, we're going to have Art talk about DoStats. And DoStats is an open source way of doing update stats that Art has written and maintained over the years. It's hugely popular. I was just at a client site and they were using a 10-year-old version of it. And Art has made tons of changes to it over the years. And you really, just like any other software, if you're using it, need to be updating it. But what I've asked him to do is to walk through the code a little bit. How do you compile it? What does it do? And so not only will you understand DoStats, but also how update stats work. So I'm really excited about that webcast. In about an hour, these will be up on our webpage, so you can go there and sign up and register for them. And look forward to seeing you at them. And then you want to do the next slide, Jack. Training. So we have one more class this year, and that's in September. It's for Informix database administrators. There are only 2 places left. There was only one, and then somebody had to cancel, and so that opened up a second place. If you're interested, please register right away because I suspect that will fill up very soon. And we will have another set sometime in November, December for next year, but I don't know what the schedule will be for that. And the next slide, please. And this is our new training servers. We have 8 servers, and that's why we have a hard limit of 8 students. We can have 4 in class, and then 4 are all 8 online. They're very fast servers with 8 cores and the latest version of Informix on them. And the next slide, please. And just a little bit advanced data tools. Besides doing these webcasts, we do have to work sometimes, in fact, a lot. And we do consulting, training, remote DBA monitoring and support. Jack just worked with us on a huge data warehouse migration from one system to another. So that was multi-terabytes of time series data. But so if you have anything like that, just holler. We'd be glad to talk to you. And last but not least, thank you. Thank you, Jack, for doing this. This has been most helpful. And any last words, Jack?
No.
Cool. Well, thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Have a good day.